Hi class, welcome to Illustrator Lab 3. Today we are going to go more in depth on both your fill and your stroke. We're going to review the pen tool, we're going to introduce the width tool, we're going to use groups, your artboard tool, the eyedropper tool, and the magic wand tool. The file you need is finchandcrow.ai. That's an Illustrator file, so it will open directly in Illustrator instead of having to be placed. When you're ready, let's begin. All right, so you notice in this file, we have a sketch of Finch and Crow, Finch being the small bird on the right, Crow being the laughing one on the left. In your file, you should have two layers. We have the sketch layer and the vector layer. If you don't have a layers window, you can get that by clicking on Window and collecting it from the drop-down menu. The sketch layer contains the PNG called Finch and Crow. All right, now, we don't want to be moving this sketch around while we're drawing and learning other things, so we are going to lock this layer in order to no longer be able to select and access it. In our vector layer, you'll notice if we drop down the menu, we have a bunch of objects built already. All right. Now the reason we can't see them in Illustrator is not because of the order of our layers, because the vector layer is on top. What it is that all of our objects have no fill and no stroke, so they're essentially invisible to us, but not to Illustrator. In order to see how Illustrator would find these, we're going to use our outline mode to view them. So everybody hit Command Y if you're on a Mac, or Control Y if you're on a PC. And then here you'll notice that the PNG disappears. The PNG is raster information, it is a PNG, and so it cannot be displayed in our preview mode. However, we can see anything that is vector. So now if I hit my hotkey V for my selection tool, and I click and drag over all these objects, you notice that they have no stroke and no fill in our toolbar. All right, we're going to give them these properties so that we create a small cartoon image of them that have a black stroke and a white fill. To exit outline mode, now that we've found where the vector objects are, we're going to hit Command Y again Control if you're in a PC. And with all the vectors selected, we're going to double click on our stroke tool here, and we're going to change it to pure black, which is hex code 000000, and hit OK. I have an error on my computer, so I'm going to have to reselect it. Yours probably did it right off the bat. All right, we now have black stroked objects. Next, let's add some white fill. Not all of our objects need white fill, because some of them are details that will lay on top of other objects. So let's start by clicking on one of the objects we know is going to need white fill, and this big body object here. We'll bring fill forward on our toolbar, double click, and select white. You'll notice that already, because of that fill, it's overlapping some of those pieces of path that were kind of intersecting it. The wing here, we still see through it to the back, so let's change this to have a white fill as well. Now instead of going here and double clicking our fill, let's just use our eyedropper. Eyedropper is hotkey I, and what it does, if I open up the eyedropper, is it will, from where you click, collect or pick up information. For me, I want to just make sure that it at least picks up color. So that's from the focal stroke and fill. Most of these other things I'm going to ignore for now, but just make sure that it is collecting your stroke and your fill. And then hit OK. All right, so now that you have an eyedropper and you've calibrated it, or at least made sure that it will collect your information, if you click on your body piece, that includes the head and the tail, it will collect the stroke and fill and apply it to the object you have selected. All right, I want to do the same thing to my two little feet. So I'm going to select both of them, holding down Shift to select the other, and then hit I for eyedropper and select that white fill black stroke object. Now that's all the objects that I want to give white fill. If you do give objects white fill Otherwise, there's a chance that they'll start creating some small problems for you, visual problems. And that's because, if I collect this wing really quick and show you, I'm just going to duplicate it for a moment. The fill goes from the very first anchor point to the last anchor point in a straight line. There are cases in some of these objects where that would create kind of a small overlap of white fill, and we don't want that. All right, so I'm going to delete that copy for you. I just wanted you to see that it will automatically always fill from the first and the last of an open path with a straight line. If this path was closed, we wouldn't have that same problem. An example of a closed path would be the head, body, and tail. There's not an open end where there's an anchor point sticking out. It's all connected. All right, so now that we have white fill and black stroke, I want to start deciding things about this to create more of a visual hierarchy. Right now it's a little bit more like a coloring page where it doesn't really matter how thick the lines are, but we want to tell a viewer which lines are important, which lines are forms, and which lines are details. We want to tell the viewer what forms are first because that's how we understand the world three-dimensionally. Details are just accessory. So we're going to select our body and our wing objects. And up here on your control bar, you'll notice that you have the stroke and how many points wide it is. By default, every time you give an object a stroke, it will come in at 1 point. If you don't have your control bar, by the way, go ahead and click Window and make sure you've selected Control. All right, so now with the body and the wing selected, we're going to bump this stroke up to 5 points. Wonderful. We're going to bump the stroke of the 2 feet and the eyebrow to 4. We're going to take the eyeball and the kind of the mouth line, the little frowny mouth, and we're going to bump those to 3. And then we're going to take all the other little teeny lines, hold down Shift and select all of those with your selection tool, hotkey V. We're going to select all other little lines in here and bump them to 2 points. All right, before we move on, I don't love having a line for the pupil, so this is a very rare instance where I would change this to a fill, a black fill instead of a stroke, so it feels a little bit more like a pupil. All right, so this is looking quite a bit more like we desire, more of like a character that's separate from its background and has nice forms and also some details. What doesn't feel finished about this is these really squared off, harsh ends to the path. Now, if you open your stroke palette, we're going to go here to our stroke palette. If you don't have it here handy on like a little nice drop-down swatch, you can get it always by coming to Window and then to Stroke. Now in Stroke, we have a couple different options for caps to paths, so how it treats an open anchor point. And we have, by default, this butt cap right here. We also have a round cap and a protruding butt cap. I think it's a protruding, extending. Anyways, it comes out from the end of the anchor point like the little icon does. We're not going to use these today on this. I'm going to teach you something a little bit more refined, but I just wanted you to I wanted to let you know where they were in case you ever kind of needed something like them. You'll notice it also has a way to treat corners, a sharp corner, a round corner, or a beveled corner. All right, just so that you've seen them, go ahead and just push that window aside. And I'm going to teach you something a little bit more handy for really clean strokes. We're going to use the width tool. All right, the hotkey for this tool is Shift W. Shift W for width. And the tool is right here on your toolbar. It's a very strange looking icon for a tool. It doesn't make sense until you've used the tool for a long time. So I apologize. It looks kind of like a weird ghost, mecha ghost something. Anyways. Now the width tool allows you to, I'm going to come up here and I want you to come up here to the eyebrow. The width tool allows you to add or subtract width to anywhere that you click along a path. All right, so you notice that if you click along a path and you start dragging outwards or inwards, that it stretches the path for you. All right, so I can make this a little bit more dynamic of a path. It's not uniform. I'm going to add another one right here to kind of keep this wide at the point. And then at the very end of the path, the part that looks unfinished because it's kind of squarish, I'm going to pull the width all the way to 0. Now I don't love how close these are because they're kind of creating a bumpiness that I don't love. So I can grab a previously created width and slide it along the path, or I can grab a previously created width and reduce its size in order to clean up kind of how the path presents that width, that variable kind of thick, thin, thick, thin. I'm going to go ahead and pinch off the other end. And what I have now is a nice clean, almost feels like an ink brushed line. All right, let's do it to this little end of the beak here that almost makes it to the corner. Now, if I use my width tool, Shift W, and I click and grab and start pointing this, what happens is it goes all the way from the 2 points, excuse me, how big is this one? This one is 2 points. It goes from the 2 points at the very end, the widest, down to 0, and it takes a very long time to do it because it's a pretty long path. I don't want it to get this thin this fast. I want it to stay pretty thick until the very end and then close off. So go ahead and hit Control Z or Command Z to go back a step. I want to build in a width bar that's going to protect most of the path from shrinking. I'm going to do that by, I'm going to be in my width tool, Shift W. I'm going to double click here, maybe about a third of the way up the beak. And what it's going to ask is, do you want a width bar? And because I clicked somewhere along the line that it was already 2 pixels wide, this dialog box will pop up with a 2 pixel wide width bar. And I will say OK. Now I can pinch off the end, and it will only go from 2 to 1 between this last third of the beak instead of from this anchor point all the way down. So let's do that again. Let's do this from the bottom. We'll go about 2/3 of the way along the little chin side of the beak, double click, hit Enter, and then using our width tool, pinch off the end. I would do the same thing to the little frowny mouth, except for I want to keep it thick all the way basically to the corner of the mouth right here where it turns into the frown. So I'm going to double click here. And you'll notice that it's giving me a width bar that is 3 pixels. And I'll hit OK. And then shrink that down. So now our face looks a little bit more finished. We don't have any of those square paths to distract us. It keeps things very smooth and flowing. We're going to do the same thing to all of these small feathers. Now instead of adding a width bar to the middle and then pinching off the ends, I'm going to start by by pinching off one end. So I'm going to hit Shift W. I'm going to pinch off one end, and then by default, because one end has a width now and it's no longer uniform, one has been created at the beginning. So if you hover your cursor over it, there will be one that exists. If I want to duplicate that one, I can hold down my Option key while inside the width tool and pull a duplicate of that width down here to the middle and then pinch off my end. All right, so I'm going to do that again. I'm going to pinch off one end. I'm going to hold down my Option key to duplicate the width of the far end, the wide end, and then pinch it off. Pinch, Option, duplicate. And I'm so sorry I didn't mention it before, but if you are on a PC, your hotkey is Alt, not Option. Pinch, duplicate with Alt or Option, pinch, pinch, duplicate, pinch. This is all while we're inside the width tool. The Option key just allows us to duplicate while we're inside of it. All right, now for the wing, we can just use our width tool, Shift W, to pinch off the end here. Now the reason that it doesn't get from small here all the way around our path to the very end is that there is a corner. There's a pair of broken handlebars in this vector piece. And so a width tool cannot go past a set of broken handlebars. It must stop. So it goes from 0 points to 5 points just in this very short distance. If I were to go ahead and use my width tool and pinch off this end, it's going to last all the way until the first corner where I have broken handlebars. That's bad. So Command Z if you followed me along. Instead, we're going to have to build in kind of a protective width bar somewhere here, kind of along where the bird's wrist would be. I'm going to double click there, hit enter because it will automatically fill with the width that the line already is. Hit OK and pinch off the end. Now if I wanted that to be a little longer, a little more subtle, I can move the width bar further down the wing to make that a little bit more gradual. All right, let's go ahead and work on the width bar for how the leg intersects the body. So I'm going to add a width bar here below the body and pinch it off. Double click, enter, pinch. And then we're going to do the same thing to these little feathers that we did earlier. So remember, you pinch one end off, hold down Option to duplicate that far width bar, and then pinch off the second end. You pinch off the second end, the same time pinch off the first end, what you have is a glitch. So don't do that. Pinch, duplicate, pinch. All right, the very last piece of path here that we need to do anything to is this little overlap of the foot that shows kind of that the front toe is coming up in front of the back toe. If we pinch off this end here, you'll notice that what we get is a staggered line. This line does not match up with the line of the toe. So instead of moving our lines around, let's use our width tool to our advantage. So you can hit Shift W. If you hover your cursor over this final piece, we can hold down Option while manipulating the width bar that's already there, and it can grow just the one side of our width bar independent of the of the top side. So you notice that it's growing the bottom, not the top, if we hold down Option while we're growing it. So I'm going to come up here further in and then add enough width to cover that little hangnail. You need to maybe adjust the handlebar just a tad just to get it to hide it. That's totally fine. All right, we now no longer have any capped edges, no squares. And now we have a width hierarchy that tells us what is the basic form, any cross forms or cross contours, and what are details. The next part of this lecture is going to be creating the crow. Now there are no vectors for the crow in the file. We are going to build them. And we're going to build them a lot like they were built here in Finch. All right. So let's start with our pen tool. We can actually just load. If we go ahead and just click on any stroke, it will load that information in our fill and stroke. So if I clicked on something that was just stroke, you notice I no longer have fill. Let's do that because we might want to be looking through objects. So go ahead and let's select the little frowny beak, have that width, or stroke width, and that fill loaded into our information. And then we'll hit P for pen, and we're going to start building the crow. Now you notice that when we built Finch, or excuse me, when we manipulated the vectors of Finch, that the body and tail were one piece. It's because we didn't want any weird seams down here. We're going to do the same thing with crow. We're going to build the body and tail into one piece, the wing into one piece, etc., and then add the details on top. So let's start here with the beak. You're going to have to remember your pen tool lesson. We're going to click and drag for a set of handlebars. Hold down Option in order to turn a corner. Option, turn corner. These got a lot of sharp edges, this crow. So hold down Option a lot. Now we're getting to the point where we're going to draw through behind the wing and then connect it to the tail. So I want you to come down here to the middle of the wing. Create a nice little path, hold down Option, and then we're going to continue it pretending like it's going to connect in the back. And continue to make our file. This will be our path. Click and drag for handlebars so you have a little bit of curve. I don't want to see too many straight lines. There's a lot of straight lines in this crow, but I want to make sure that we give some curve to keep it feeling alive. Click and drag for curve. Hold down Option. Click the anchor point to delete the curve. Or so let me delete the second handlebar. All right, now we're back to connecting this down into the body. So I'm going to create a path. That curves down and connects to the body. I'm going to use my pen tool to come up here to the chest. We want the big body form to be the same as the tail form. That's why we're doing this. Let's see. Get a little curve in there. Curve, broken handlebar, curve, broken handlebar. This has got a nice little S curve. So in order to start an S curve, I'm going to hold down Option while I click and drag on the anchor point, the open one, to give myself a handlebar. And then I'll click and drag again to get a second one. Now hold down Option to break that connection between the next one. All right, I'm to the throat now. And I will come up here and make a nice curve for the throat. Bottom of the beak seems to be a pretty straight line. Now, I'm not going to continue into the smile here. I'm going to keep my entire outline a nice big path all together. So I'm going to come all the way up here and kind of simplify that line a little bit. All right, so this is my first line. It is all one complete form. I am going to adjust the bottom of this tail here. I don't love the way that it... There we go, it just needs to be further in. I wanted it to follow that drawing just a little bit closer. All right, so there's my big form line. Let's do another couple form lines and then we'll move on to our smaller details. So the next form line we're going to do is the outside of this frontal wing. This is going to be an open path like the finch's wing, where we see kind of the top of the shoulder and wrist and the back of the elbow. And so we're going to start here and draw a path. It goes around just the outside of the wing. We're not going to try to trace all the little feather pieces on the inside, as tempting as that might be. Click and drag for little corners. And get nice long handlebars for those big long curves on the top of the wing. And then end below your first anchor point so we have an open path. All right, so you're probably just a little bit slower than I am. I'm very fast at this and you're still learning. So always feel free to pause the video and finish the form, then press play and we'll move on to the next one. I do want you to stick with me on the pacing though, which things we build at what time, because I don't want them to trip you up later. All right, so if you need to pause and finish the wing, or if you've already paused to finish the body, that's totally fine. When you're done, we're going to move on to the back wing here. Now, you'll notice that I started my path on the inside of my first object. That's because I'm going to change the order of the objects later when they have a white fill to hide part of this path. I am going to make it a whole path. So I'm going to close it up behind the crow. It is almost always better to have closed paths than open paths if you can help it. In cases such as this, we can't help it. but closed paths will behave just a little bit better visually, especially if we're just doing something simple like a single fill and a single stroke. So I want you to get in the habit of closing up paths that could be hidden behind other things, or combining forms behind other forms so that they are connected. All right, the next couple forms we have to build are the feet. These are big forms. All right, so we have foot number 1. Let's see, create a little path there. Remember, don't follow the toe all the way in. We'll create a little detail line for that later, like we saw in Finch. I'm going to hold down Option and just break this handlebar because I could really use a curve off the bat there. Come all the way up here and leave it as an open path. All right, now again, I'm going to start inside the crow's body for this path because I'm going to hide it behind that object later. And then I'm going to close the path because it's always smarter to have a closed path than an open one. Now for this toe that peeks out, we're just going to create a little box and we're going to close it up because we can. All right, so those are all of our closed paths that we're going to create. Everything else, those are all of our form paths, and it is also all the closed paths that we're going to create. The rest of them are going to be open paths. Let's start in the back wing here, since we're pretty close to that already, having just finished the toes. We'll create this big long curve. And I just want you to bring it all the way to the outside form of the wing, and then hit P again so that you can start a new path elsewhere in the wing. And again, go ahead and bring it all the way to the other path. Make sure they touch. They cannot ever connect in a T, like a three-way intersection. There's no way to have like a path that tees, but we can visually make them look like that by making sure that we draw our path in a way that touches. We'll do it again, P, and then draw this little path, P, draw these little paths. Before I forget, I'm going to draw that little path that goes into the foot. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag to get a similar curve to what the top of the toe already was. And then I'll come up here to the little feathers that show how the crow's leg kind of ruffles those a little bit. Every time you go start a new path, just hit P. Let's go up to the chest now. There's a pretty long piece of path here that shows the overlap of this feather, so I'm going to draw that in by hotkey P. And then I'm going to quickly trace these little chest feathers, these little chest throat feathers. And this little feather detail. There on the chest. Along with this piece that shows that the throat comes in front of this very first feather. All right, when you're done with those, I want you to move on to the mouth. Let's do a big long path for the underside of the beak here. I'm going to turn the corner there at the little smile. And we're going to add a second path for the little cheek fold where the smile comes up. And we'll add a path for the tongue. And a small path for what appears to be the back of the throat. And we'll add our couple of paths for the top of the beak. These are all detail lines. And since they're a little curvier, they're not quite so sharp. When you're done, let's go ahead and get 2 paths in for the eye, the laughing, squinty eye. You're getting probably much faster at the pen tool at this point. That's great. Let's move on to the tail. Let's add in some of those detail lines of the tail. Maybe I drew that a little bit. Well, probably this path is a little too curvy. That's why. Hit P every time you want to start a new path. Click and drag to begin your path with a curve. And we'll get through these really quick. Some of these little detail lines have a curve to them. Some of them are pretty much just straight, so you can just draw some straight ones. When you're done with all the detail lines on the tail, we've got just the wing left. All right, so we have a couple lines. We have one line that I want to keep totally intact, and it's this kind of like mid-level feathers on the top of the wing here. So let's create a really long path for that one. Remember, always pause if you need to, and then catch up so that you can follow along. There's that one really long path that comes along the back side of that wing, the top side of that wing. And we'll do the little broken path. Kind of describe some of the feathers that lay on top of that. It's a very textured bird. If you weren't quick with the pen tool before this, you'll be much quicker afterwards. All right, and finally we'll add all the little detail lines here on the wing feathers near the tip. Doesn't necessarily matter what order you go in for these. We will be changing the order of some of our objects later as we go anyways, because probably we didn't draw them in the order that they need to be in for the file to look correct. And that's totally fine. We can always reorder those. We played a lot with that in our first lab. Remember to have as few anchor points as you can for really nice graceful curves. So this piece of path right here just needed the 2 anchor points. Almost all of these detail lines only need 2 anchor points to achieve their curves. Actually, this calls to attention that I don't love that path right there. I need to change it a little bit. Probably you made yours a little bit better. And of course that snowballs into me having to change a couple other things along the way. That's all right, give you some time to catch up. Oh gosh, I almost missed one. There we go. All right. This should be all the lines that you're going to need to build the character Crow. If you don't have all of them, pause the video, get caught up, and then we'll move on. All right, much like Finch, we're going to start by changing our forms to have a white fill. I'm going to collect the form of the outside of Crow, the form of the wing, the feet, plus that little toe that we had to draw, and then the front wing. These are the only ones that are going to need white fill because between all of them, the background will be white. Now, if I hit I for eyedropper, I can collect the fill and stroke properties from Finch. All right, so now we have a 5-point stroke and a white fill. I think that's a great place to start. All right, now we're going to have a little bit of an order problem where we drew this wing and now it's covering up the chest of the crow. So let's select all of those pieces that we just drew on there. If you accidentally click and drag over the crow's body, go ahead and hold down Shift and then deselect it. So Shift and then just click on it with your selection tool. And then we will send these to the back of the layer using Command, Shift, and left bracket. Now the reason they didn't go behind the sketch is because the sketch is on the next layer below. And using those bracket keys cannot skip layers. All right, same thing with this foot. We're going to need to send this toe back. So I'm just going to use my little bracket tool. Hold down Shift, select both paths, and then send it all the way back with Command, Shift, and left bracket. Everything else appears to be in the correct order. We'll find out if something's wrong later. All right, so now that we have our forms, let's decide what our next step up are. So on our little finch here, we had some lines on the beak that were a little more important. The eyebrow and the eye were a little more important. They're heavier stroke than the details. So this, the piece of path that we're going to need are this form line in the front of the wing, the middle feather line across the top of the front wing. Let's get this continuation of the kind of the big primary feathers. Let's grab those two. And let's grab the beak. Just the part that is the underside of the beak, not the little detail lines. And we will increase those stroke to 3, 4. Let's do 3.5. Let's type in 3.5 and then hit enter. Money. All right. The next couple of lines, let's collect the underside of the chin and the top side of the beak. Those are a little important. The top little detail feathers on the front wing. I think the feathers that cover a little bit of the foot, and we'll increase those. Let's go to 2 or 2.5. Let's do 2.5. All right, our eye and the little pinch of the cheeks, let's make those nice and thick. We want those to be important. We'll get those all the way back up to 5. We might even increase the one of the eye a little bit more once we get there. All right, now all other lines, I'm fairly certain we can leave small. That excludes actually these lines that show the cross form. So the one under the chin here and the one across the top of the toe. Those are our 2 major players here. Let's go ahead and bump those up to like 4. And then we'll adjust those ends, make them nice and clean. I guess I'm going back on all my word because I want to create a little more on the tongue. 2 point. And I think I want to, on the little center line of a few of these, the long center line, this is the shaft of the feather, I think I want to create 2 on those little shaft lines. Perhaps this little bit of feather here. All right, 2. So now we have a nice variation of line. They're just not finished yet. We haven't closed off any of the details or forms. So now we're going to come in with our width tool. We'll start up at the face. And we can start pinching off and duplicating widths to finish up lines. Now the eye, I think I want it to be a little bit wider, so I'm going to hold down Option while I enlarge the width tool right here in the center so that I grow it on one side by using that Option key. Maybe I'll even duplicate that width here to the back so it stays nice and wide. So get in the habit of pinching off all the ends. Now if you have a corner like this where the mouth is protruding over that nice little corner of the mouth cheek line, let's go ahead and just adjust the handlebar for that path just to cover it so we don't have any weird sticking out kind of, I don't know, I call them hangnails, really annoying pieces that stick out. I'm going to return to the width tool and close off some of these capped ends, but protecting the gradual width by putting in a width bar. Remember, you double click to get that option. So I'm going to close off this. Let me bring this out, and then I'm going to use my width tool again and hold down Option just so that I can just adjust one side of the path at a time there to restore that little bit of width. If your path is like mine and the inside corner of the mouth and the line here to describe it as it crosses into the form don't quite match up, you can actually move them a little bit, maybe turn that path a tad. Remember to try to keep true to the drawing, but we just don't want the hangnail, the weird little mismatch. All right, and we'll just work our way down. Now with these paths being, they have a lot of corners on them, I probably just need to just use my width tool just to pinch off ends. I don't need to worry about protecting the gradual width too much. I'm going to protect it here by double clicking, hitting enter, and then pinching off the end. And I can leave these ones pretty much alone. There's really no need. They don't have an end that shows. That's one of the reasons that we were hiding the ends inside the feathers. All right, so here's one that I missed. I knew I was going to miss one. I'm going to have to make that really wide. So that it kind of matches the form as it crosses over. All right, when I'm done, I'm going to move on into this little wing here. I'll just begin protecting the width and then pinching off the end to finish it. Anywhere that it protrudes in front. You don't have to do it if the path ends somewhere where we don't see it. So either if it ends on top of another path or ends behind another shape with a fill. So here's an example of that funny little hangnail shape. So I can either kind of adjust where the corner of that is, maybe the handlebar just a tad, or maybe I have to drag my toe shape anchor point over the top. Anyways, do any adjustments necessary to make sure that it looks nice and clean. No hangnails. Nobody likes hangnails. All right, when you're done, keep working your way around your crow. Make ends nice and sharp. Oh, look, this one should be 2 points. I'm going to select it and make it 2 points. And then I'm going to duplicate that twice. Pinch off the ends. Now, if you ever create a width and you're like, ah, oh, crap, I don't need that, you can select it with the width tool and then hit delete. And then the width will continue to the next corner or the end of the path. So you do have the option of deleting them once they're created, which some people panic about the first time. They accidentally create too many. I do recommend making all your paths before doing all this work, because you never know how they're going to cross over each other or intersect until you've made them as wide as they need to be or placed them all where they should be in the drawing. So I'm going to create this. Gotta avoid that hangnail. None of those, no thank you. Now, as fast as you go to the pen tool, you're going to get just as fast with the width tool. I'm just going to close off these two little ends here. All right, that might be just about all of my ends that I want to pinch off. All right, now looking at this, once I've pinched off all the ends, there's a couple things I think visually I'd like to change. I think I want these 3 feather shapes in the front here to be 2 points. They just feel a little bit weak for such a great little area, and they're not competing with any of those other lines. I think next I want my tongue to be 3 points. I'm going to take back the lines that include the top and the chin piece of the beak here, that include like where it stops being beak and starts being feathers. And I'm going to just change those back to 2. I want them to be a little bit more light so they just don't interrupt the face quite as strongly. I wonder what one would look like. Oh, I think I like 1 better. Fancy that. All right, now that I've got all these lines created, I should probably start organizing my file a little bit in case I need to move or adjust certain pieces. So I'm going to select all of the paths that are included in that back wing there and hit Command G. And that's Control if you're on a PC. I'm going to group my back foot shapes, my front foot shapes. I've got to collect these little pieces of path. And I will group, this is going to be a second because there's a lot to select here. I'm going to group all of the shapes that are included in the front wing, including the outside shape. I think I got them all. Control G, Command G. I will group my little chest feather details together and my eye together, and maybe all of my mouth shapes too. Everything that creates the beak there, except for the outside. I'm going to group those. All right, now in order to group the kind of the big form, the head, the tail, everything that's connected there, I'm going to select all of the crow and then hold down Shift to deselect my previous groups. So then all I should have left selected is that big form and those details. And then I'll hit Control G again. Now, this changed the order of something down here. Now my foot is behind my crow's body, so I'm going to have to use my bracket keys to bring that forward again. So that might sneak up on you. Just be aware that it'll happen. All right, once you have both characters in full line art, let's go ahead and turn off the sketch. We don't need it anymore, but we do want our artboard to have a different color background so that we see the difference between the white fill and the background. So we're going to use our pen tool. We're just going to go ahead and create a rectangle. I'm going to hold down Shift so that my lines are straight. I don't drag them crooked. And instead of this object being no fill with black stroke, let's go ahead and give it a fill. We're going to double click on fill. And I want you to give it the hex code D8, D8, D8. It's a very soft gray. And then hit OK. Go ahead and make sure it doesn't have a stroke if it did by accident. Now we'll send it to the back of the layer with Command Shift and left bracket. And we now have black stroke, white fill characters on a gray background. Now for fun, to learn a couple of tools, we're going to create kind of an inverse or a negative of this to make the crow look black. And so in order to do that, we're going to create an entire copy of this artboard. So not just copying our crow or making our artboard bigger and then extending it to the side. We're going to go to our Artboard Tool here in our toolbar. And once we have the artboard selected, we're going to begin to click and drag it. And we're going to hold down Option. Remember, this is a way that you can duplicate objects, and it's also a way that you can duplicate artboards. And if your objects are unlocked, it will duplicate any unlocked object as well. So now when I let go of my click, I should have a duplicate artboard with duplicate vectors. We can hotkey V just to exit my Artboard tool. Now what I'm about to do is I'm about to teach you how to use the magic wand tool a little bit instead of having to select all these groups individually, we're going to use the Magic Wand tool to select something that has the same fill and stroke. But we don't want to change our first original artboard, so we are going to have to use hotkey V to select everything on it and lock it, Command 2. If you're on a PC, that's Control 2. That is just a hotkey to lock anything that is selected. So you notice I can't click and drag and select anything on this artboard anymore. If you wish to unlock objects, you can hold down Command Option and 2, or Command Alt 2 on a PC, and then it will unlock any locked objects. All right, but I do want them locked, so I'm going to re-hit Command 2. All right, can't change them. All right, so now I want to change the background of this layer. We're going to make the background black, so go ahead and select that little rectangle that you drew, and let's make it all the way black. And then let's lock it, Command 2. Now I want to change everything on here that has a black stroke and a white fill to have different properties. So we're going to use what's called the Magic Wand tool. It's this third tool on your selection little piece of your toolbar. All right, if you double click on the Magic Wand tool, you'll notice that it can collect fill color, and it has a tolerance. So if you wanted to collect maybe a lot of things that were green in the image or a lot of things that were blue, you could give it a high tolerance and it'll grab a lot of colors that are related. It also has stroke color with a tolerance. We're going to leave both the tolerances at 0, or you're going to set them to 0 if they came in at a default 32, because we want it to grab both at the same time. We don't want it to, we want no discretion. All right. We won't keep the stroke weights for now, but just make sure that your fill color and stroke color are both selected and that they have a 0 tolerance. Now, so that hotkey is Y to get to your Magic Wand tool. I'm going to collapse that. And if I select something that has a white fill and a black stroke, which includes both pieces on Crow and on Finch, I can double click on the fill and stroke and change them all at the same time. I'm going to double click on my fill here. Now I'm not going to make this black, I'm not going to make it pure black, I do want it to stand out against the background a little bit. So I'm going to give it the hex code 545454. It'll be very dark gray, and hit OK. I'm going to bring stroke forward, double click on stroke, and give it a white stroke, and hit OK. Now next we're going to want to change the stroke of anything that is just a black fill with, black stroke with no fill. So I'm going to have to click with my Magic Wand tool on something that is only black stroke, and you'll notice that it collects everything that is only black stroke. Now I can change that to be a white stroke. The only thing that this didn't change is the one anomaly here, which we had a black fill only object. So we can just change that to white to make it the negative. Let's do that manually since it's just one of them. All right, there you have it. We have Finch and Crow, and we have the negative version. So you should have gotten quite a bit faster at the pen tool today. You should feel pretty good about the width tool and closing up edges or adding some variable width into some stroke. There are some default ones that are included in the program, some default width profiles, and I really just, I don't want you to ever feel stuck using them because they're not very creative, and you are very creative. So if you ever do find them, forgive me, and I will see you for Illustrator Lab 4. Thank you.